Hey everyone, this is Mike tomorrow. I want to welcome you to this presentation of the perfect realignment for the NCAA. And I know that you're probably wondering, why am I doing this? I'm like, I got interested because, all the realignments are happening or going to happen and everything else. And I was like, maybe what happens if we had a reset and decide, why don't we put all the teams based on where they are in the country instead of having like a conference that has like teams in Ohio and California being one conference? You know what I mean? Here's the scenario. The NCAA commissioner has appointed me to realign and create new conferences. The conferences would be based on geography. Here's the thing. There'd be no independent teams, whether if it's in the FBS or FCS or basketball. There will be no independent team. All teams must be in a conference for the sports. No conference shall have a mix of FBS and non-FBS teams. So like if the school is in an FBS, it will be FBS. If a school has FCS or they don't have football, they will stay in that one. So that's the way I'm doing it. All divisions must have between 10 and 12 teams. There will be a few exceptions, as I will point them out. There will be a few because there was like one division or one conference that had like, I forgot to put teams in, so that's why they would have 13. And you'll see as I go along why I did that. But I tried to stay between 10 and 12. And I tried to keep historical rivalries intact based on geography. And then the Ivy League must stay the same with no changes allowed, which I have done that. And then disclaimer, this is just my opinion and suggestion. Yes, I do realize this will not happen for real, but it's just an idea. You know what I mean? So I mean, we could all have a great idea and all that. All right, so here's a map of how the FBS conferences would be. As you can tell, black has no teams. And then you can tell on the thing here on the key all the names of the conferences and in all the states that are highlighted. Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Louisiana are the only states that have two lines in it, or two different colors. I'm not doing a map like this for the FCS or the non FBS teams and all the non football teams and all that. So, but for the FBS, yes, I'm doing a map. So let's get on with our first conference. And I choose the Big East as the name of this one. And we're going to start out in the Northeast and go all the way out to the West. That's how we're doing that for all these, just to let you know. So in the Big East, I have Army, I have Boston College, I have Buffalo, Navy, Penn State, Rutgers, Syracuse, Temple, UConn, and UMass. Now, you're saying, why would I put Army and Navy together? Well, they have a rivalry, and I'm like, I didn't want to divide them up. I know that Navy is down in Annapolis, Maryland, and you're going to see later that the other option here would have been Pittsburgh, but I choose to put Pittsburgh in the next conference we're going to talk about because of the fact that it would be better with that conference. So Pittsburgh would have been in there and all that. So that's why I decided to do what I did and put Army and Navy together. And they're both in the Patriot League and all that. And they're the only two teams in that current conference that are FBS teams. So it's like, and the rule is on here, all FBS teams must be in FBS conferences. And no FBS and no FCS may share the same conference. So that's why I did that. And I figured we put Boston College and UMass on the same conference. That'd be so cool to see that. The Bay State rivalry right there. And then, of course, the rivalry between UConn and UMass, the historic rivalry there. And then UMass and Temple with the A10 when they were both in the A10. And then, of course, Boston College and Syracuse. They were both in the Big East, and they're both in the ACC right now. And then, of course, you have Boston College, Syracuse, and UConn that were all in the Big East as well, but just at one point in time. So it's like, here's some more historical rivalries to be in there. And then now you have Penn State and Rutgers that are in the Big Ten. So we go into our next conference, and I call this the Colonial, though we could work it out on a different name per se. And in this one, we have Delaware, James Madison, Liberty, Marshall, Maryland, Old Dominion, Pittsburgh, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. Now, Delaware. I want to make this disclaimer about Delaware. They are in transition to Conference USA and the FBS. So that is why Delaware is listed on here. And it'd be so cool to see a Delaware Maryland rivalry. I know it's not a big rivalry, but I mean it could be. And then I put Pittsburgh in this conference because I think it would be better off with a rivalry with West Virginia. I think they were in the same conference before, so it'd be cool to see that. And then Marshall as well is located in West Virginia. And then you have Virginia and Virginia Tech with the ACC, and then you had Virginia and Maryland together at the ACC as well. They had a rivalry going, and then you used to have Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and Pittsburgh all be Big East. And then you have, and then you have James Madison and Old Dominion, which are in the same conference too. So, I mean, it all works out. And Liberty and Marshall are in the same conference presently too. So, I mean, so it works out. And this is all Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia schools. So it could be called the Mid-Atlantic. And that's why we have this. And I think it would be pretty cool to see some of these rivalries form. Like I've said, the Delaware, Maryland one, and then the Pittsburgh, West Virginia one could get restarted again. And then you have continuing on with Virginia, Virginia Tech. Now the next one, I call this the Carolina Conference because all these schools are in North Carolina or South Carolina. And it makes sense on here. So we have Appalachian State, Charlotte, Clemson, Coastal Carolina, Duke, East Carolina, North Carolina State, South Carolina, UNC, and Wake Forest. Now you have the four main schools of the ACC here: Duke, NC State, UNC, and Wake Forest, all in Tobacco Road rivalry there. And then you also have Clemson, who is in the ACC. Now, here's an interesting twist of fate here. You have South Carolina that's in the SEC, and then they would be in this Carolina conference. And then you have Coastal Carolina here. You have Charlotte, Appalachian State could be a great rivalry at some point. You know, all these rivalries could happen. You know, Clemson, South Carolina would be a perfect one because they're both in South Carolina. Coastal Carolina and South Carolina, maybe, you know, because they're both in South Carolina. And then East Carolina and Coastal Carolina, because they're on the east coast of the North Carolina and South Carolina. So there you go. And then maybe Charlotte and UNC because of the two big cities that represent the Carolina region. You know, so I mean, this is something that we could do and it could work out for the best. Now we go on to the Sunshine Peach Conference. Yeah, I know it's kind of lame. Here's the deal: Florida is the Sunshine State, Georgia is the Peach State. So these schools are all Florida and Georgia. So I was like trying to find a perfect name for this, and that's why I came up with the Sunshine Peach Conference. And in this conference, we have Georgia, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Georgia Tech, and Kennesaw State. Now, Kennesaw State is another school that's going from the FCS to the FBS. So that's why they are on here. And it'd be cool to see all these Georgia schools in a rivalry with together, you know. And then you have Florida, Florida State, FAU, FIU, Miami, Florida, UCF, and USF. You know, let's renew the UCF and USF rivalry there. And you could have Florida and Florida State rivalry there. I know they kind of already do with the Thanksgiving weekend game. And then FAU and FIU used to be in the same conference together. So that would be another great rivalry there. FIU and Miami, because they're both in the Miami area. You know, so, you know, and then you have your classic Florida Georgia rivalry there. So there you go. And then you also have some of the other ones: Georgia Tech and Florida State, Georgia Tech and Miami, Florida State and Miami. They were all in the ACC. So, I mean, you know, so that's why I came up with this. Now, we go to the Gulf Coast Conference. Now, I came up with these names because of where they are located. Now, in the Gulf Coast, we have Alabama, Auburn, Jacksonville State, which is in Alabama, Louisiana, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, South Alabama, Southern Mississippi, Troy, Tulane, and UAB. I chose to put LSU and Louisiana here and Tulane here as well because, you know, you have the big rivalry between Alabama and LSU. So I'm like trying to figure it out how would I be, where could I put the teams that would be perfect together? Alabama and Auburn, yes, because they are fierce rivals in the SEC. Also, Alabama and LSU. And then you also have Mississippi State and Ole Miss. They're rivals. And then you could have new rivalries with Alabama and South Alabama, or even Alabama and Troy, Alabama and UAB, because Birmingham and Tuscaloosa. are close together, and I mean, that'd be a great rivalry to see, and this would be pretty cool to see this all in play. And then we go into our next one here, and you're going to see more Louisiana teams, and you're wondering why would I put these Louisiana teams in this next conference instead of the Gulf Coast. Now we have the Southeastern Conference, excuse me. So this would be the new SEC. We would have Arkansas, Arkansas State, Kentucky, Louisiana Monroe, Louisiana Tech, Louisville, Memphis, Middle Tennessee, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Western Kentucky. So what I kind of did was I kept the Kentucky Tennessee thing going. And then I added Arkansas to the mix. Now, this would be a great rivalry to see here. Arkansas and Arkansas State. And then of course you have the Kentucky Tennessee rivalry, Tennessee Vanderbilt rivalry, and it'd be cool to see the Kentucky and Louisville rivalry. Some of these rivalries could form, and this is where I would like to see some of these. Middle Tennessee versus Tennessee, or Middle Tennessee versus Vanderbilt, and Kentucky versus Western Kentucky. You know, Louisiana Monroe versus Louisiana Tech. That would be a great rivalry right there. But I had to put them here, the two Louisiana schools that I have on here, because of the fact that I had to create space and try to figure out, oh, where can this team go, or where can that team go? And you're going to see that a lot here. Now we have the Buckeye Wolverine division. And I came up with this name because of the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Michigan Wolverines. Ohio is known as the Buckeye State, and Michigan is known as the Wolverine State. So that's kind of why I came up with the name Buckeye Wolverine. And then we have Akron, Bowling Green, Cincinnati, Kent State, Miami, Ohio State, and Toledo, all representing the Ohio side of the conference. Now, on the Michigan side of the conference, we have Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Michigan State, and Western Michigan. Now, here we could get new rivalries here, Ohio and Ohio State. You know, and even Ohio State and Cincinnati. And then with Michigan, we could get a new rivalry with Central Michigan and Michigan State since they are near each other. And then the other Michigans versus Michigan versus other ones there, That'd be pretty cool too. And I know most of these teams in Ohio and then the 3 out of 5 are actually in the MAC. So you really keep the MAC intact with these ones. And then we go on to our next one, which is actually named the Mid-American, where we have Ball State, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Iowa State, Minnesota, Missouri, Notre Dame, Northern Illinois, Northwestern, Purdue, and Wisconsin. So we already kind of have a rivalry between Indiana and Purdue. I would love to see Indiana versus Ball State. And yes, Notre Dame is in this division. This would be the perfect home for Notre Dame because of the fact that they are located in South Bend, Indiana. So maybe a Notre Dame Indiana rivalry would be so cool to see. And then we would be treated to an Iowa State rivalry. And then you have Northern Illinois versus Illinois. That'd be cool to see. Illinois versus Missouri. So I mean, it'd be pretty cool to see that happening. Of course, we have some of the Big Ten schools here: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Purdue, and Wisconsin. But I mean, and Northwestern, excuse me. But I mean, these would be great new rivalries to see, like Northern Illinois versus Northwestern, because they're in the north part of Illinois. You know, that's where I see with that. Now we have the Plains Conference, and yes, this does include Colorado, which is part of the Rocky Mountains. Yes, I know, but we have Air Force, Colorado, Colorado State, Kansas, Kansas State, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, and Tulsa. Now, I put Texas in here instead of in the next one we're going to talk about because of the fact that Oklahoma and Texas have a long standing rivalry against each other. And I'm like, I don't want to break that up. And of course, you have Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and then you have Kansas, Kansas State, and then Kansas, Nebraska could renew their rivalry. So, I mean, Colorado, Colorado State would be a perfect rivalry there. Oklahoma versus Tulsa, Oklahoma State versus Tulsa. So that's why I came up with this one, and it's the Plains States. So that's why I came up with that name. Now, the next one is the Lone Star Conference. And I had a choice to put Texas here, but I was like, I'm not going to divide up the Oklahoma Texas one. And Lone Star is the nickname for Texas. So we have Baylor, Houston, North Texas, Rice, Sam Houston, SMU, TCU, Texas A&M, Texas State, Texas Tech, UTEP, and UTSA. So you see some of these new rivalries forming here. It's like, it'd be pretty cool to see some of these. I know. I think Baylor versus Houston, they already play each other in the Big 12, if I'm not mistaken. And then they can take that rivalry into this new division. And then they also play each other versus Texas Tech. And then you have a nice rivalry with SMU. And then you could also have TCU, which you already play versus as well. So, I mean, it works out. And all these teams are located in the great state of Texas. So that works out too, where they get to stay in the state of Texas. They don't have to travel to other states like they would in the past. So this is like one of the ones that is truly in one state. And you're going to see another conference later on in this presentation. Now in the Mountain West, yeah, I could have put Colorado, Colorado State, and Air Force on here, but it's like I needed to balance them out, so that's why they're not on here. And now in the Mountain West, we have Arizona, Arizona State, Boise State, BYU, Nevada, New Mexico, New Mexico State, UNLV, Utah, Utah State, and Wyoming. So you see, Arizona State keep their rivalry. Nevada, UNLV keep their rivalry. New Mexico State keep their rivalry. Utah State is a new rivalry, and then their rivalry versus BYU, so I mean, it works out perfectly. And then I put Wyoming here. Well, I put Wyoming here because of the fact that, it makes geography sense to put Wyoming here. I could have put them in the other division or whatever, but I was like, no, I'm going to keep Wyoming on this conference, and that's the way I'm going to rock and roll with this. So that's why we have Wyoming on this one. All right, we go to the Pacific, where we have Cal, Fresno State, Hawaii, Oregon, Oregon State, San Diego State, San Jose State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Washington, and Washington State. Yes, so we keep most of the teams from the Pac 12, Pac 10 here. Of course, you have California, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Washington, and Washington State, with the additions of San Jose State, San Diego State, Hawaii, and Fresno State. And I gotta keep Hawaii in the Pacific. So it makes sense for me to do that. And all these three states plus Hawaii are all bordering the Pacific Ocean. So that's why it makes sense that we have it that way. You know, so that's why we did it that way. And then Washington State can keep their rivalry. Oregon State can keep their rivalry. Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC. So I mean, and there could be new rivalries form out of these ones. So I mean, it works out perfect, I think. Now, now we have the non-FBS, the primary conferences for all sports except for FCS football and hockey. So this is what I did. I kind of figured out where the schools are located and did that kind of thing. And I'm doing the non-FBS before we do the FCS because you kind of need to know where these primary conferences are and what they stand for and all that and what I've done. So here we go. We have the Ivy League, which I have already said that I'm keeping intact, keeping it original. So the Ivy League, you have Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Harvard, Pennsylvania, Princeton, and Yale. These are going to stay intact. These will not change. Now, our next one is the New England Conference. Yes, all these schools are in the New England area. I did not include any schools in Connecticut because of the fact that I'm going to put them with some of the schools are in the New York City metro and make that a different conference. But when it comes to the FCS, you're going to see Connecticut schools being on here too. So, in our New England conference, we have Boston University, Bryant, Holy Cross, Maine, Merrimack, New Hampshire, Northeastern, Providence, Rhode Island, Stonehill, UMass Lowell, and Vermont. So some of these American East schools are here in this division or this conference. And then we have the addition of Providence from the Big East and Rhode Island from the A10. Rhode Island plays versus some of these schools already in football. So it's like, this would be a perfect home, other than I'll kind of miss the Rhode Island UMass rivalry when it comes to basketball, you know, but we'll see what goes on with that. And then, you already have the rivalries. And then you can reunite the Boston University with the rivalry with the Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. And then and then you can form a new rivalry with Boston University and UMass Lowell. So that's where my angle is on this. So it'd be pretty cool to see this New England one be competitive. Now we go to the Metro, and this is the one that I've said that I put the Connecticut schools in because of the proximate to New York City. So we have Central Connecticut State, Fairfield, Fairleigh Dickinson, Fordham, Long Island, Manhattan, Monmouth, Quinnipiac, Ryder, Sacred Heart, St. John's, St. Peter's, and Wagner. Now, what I have done here, yes, I already said I put the Connecticut schools on here, and I put the New York City schools on here, and I also put the the New Jersey schools that are near New York City, and that's why it's called the Metro Conference. And we see some of the schools on here. St. John's from the Big East could be a powerhouse in this conference. And then you have Fordham from the A10. Then you have some of the other ones here, smaller schools. But I mean, you put the Fordham, you put the St. John's in here, and it's like, we have a great conference right here. So I cannot wait to see all the New York City rivalries and all the rivalries in Connecticut and New Jersey. You know. Now the next one is called the Empire Conference because of the Empire State. Now we have Albany, Binghamton, Kansas. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. Colgate, Hofstra, Iona, Lemoyne, Marist, Niagara, Siena, St. Bonaventure, and Stony Brook. Now, I could have put Stony Brook, Hofstra, and Iona in the previous conference, but I'm like, it's already jam packed, so it's like, why don't I just put them in this conference? And like the name has said, Empire, Empire State. New York is the Empire State, so that's why all these schools are in New York State. You have Stony Brook, Hofstra, they're on Long Island, and you also have Iona, which is in Westchester. Yeah, I could have put them in the metro, like I said, but then this conference would have been small, and the other conference would have been larger. And I was trying to balance things out, so that's why I did put them in here. It'd be real cool to see how they would all perform. St. Bonaventure is from the A10. And you have Albany from American East. I think Binghamton is in there. And then you have some of the other smaller schools on here. So, I mean, it'd be pretty cool to see some new rivalries form in New York State, especially Niagara and St. Bonaventure because they're both in Western New York. Siena and Albany are near each other. So that'd be a great rivalry to see. Hofstra, Stony Brook is already a rivalry on Long Island, and you add Iona to that, that'd be cool too. Now we go to the Atlantic Conference. We have Delaware State, Drexel, LaSalle, Lafayette, Lehigh, the New Jersey Institute of Technology, or NJIT, Seton Hall, St. Joseph's, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, UMES, and then we have Villanova. Now here would be a great rivalry per se. Drexel, LaSalle, St. Joseph's, Villanova. They're all in the Philadelphia metro area. And then we have the twist of Lafayette and Lehigh being in eastern Pennsylvania. So that'd be a cool rivalry there. NJIT and Seton Hall would be a great rivalry because they're both in New Jersey. And then potentially Delaware State and UMES would be a great rivalry there. So that's why I put them there. Now we go to the Mason-Dixon Conference, and this is named because of the Mason-Dixon line between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And all these schools are either in Pennsylvania or Maryland. So that's where you get the name. So you have Bucknell, Coppin State, Duquesne, Loyola, Maryland. Mercyhurst is a school that's in transition from Division II to Division I. So this would be a perfect home for it. And then they're located up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And then we have Morgan State, Mount St. Mary's, Robert Morris, St. Francis, Townsend, or Towson. Yeah, it's Townsend. And then you have UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Now, I can see this conference being a great conference for the teams. It's a great conference because it's Pennsylvania, Maryland, per se. So, and these are all the smaller schools in Pennsylvania and Maryland. But I can see this being a great conference. Now, the next one is the Capital Conference. And it's so named the Capital because of Washington, D.C., and then you have the Capital, Virginia, Richmond. So all these schools are from either D.C. or Virginia. And we have American, George Mason, George Washington, Georgetown, Hampton, Howard, Longwood, Norfolk State, Radford, Richmond, VCU, VMI, and William and Mary. Now, here's some interesting um, rivalries that I would love to see. American, George Washington, Georgetown, Howard. They're all in Washington, D.C. So maybe like the capital rivalry there. And then, of course, you still have the Richmond and VCU rivalry from the A10. And then, of course, you have George Washington and George Mason from the A10. So four of the A10 schools are in this conference. And, Georgetown is a powerful team. So, meaning adding Georgetown to this mix, that'd be huge. And then you have some of the other ones like Hampton, Norfolk State, and William and Mary. They are all in the Virginia Beach area. So it's like you have that rivalry there in that part of Virginia. You know, but it'd be cool to see VCU versus VMI. You know, and see how that would go for it. Now the next conference we have is the Tar Heel. I call it the Tar Heel because North Carolina is the Tar Heel state. So we have Campbell, Elon, Gardner-Webb, High Point, and North Carolina Central, North Carolina A&T, UNC Asheville, UNC Greensboro, UNC Wilmington, and Western Carolina. So this would be a great conference for all you people in the Tar Heel state. Because you have all these schools in your state, and it'd be cool if all these schools had their own conference in their own state. You share a state, you need to share a conference. So I mean, all these schools are in that state. Now you notice a couple of schools that are not listed here. That are going to be listed in the next one. And that's Davidson and Queens. I did that because of the fact that, you know, Davidson is in the Charlotte area and Queens is in the Charlotte area. And they'd be perfect for the next conference we're going to introduce. I mean, But yeah, I would love to see all these North Carolina schools have a rivalry against one another. UNC Asheville versus Western Carolina, and then you have some of the other ones there. The next one we have is the Palmetto, because all these except for two of them are all located in South Carolina, South Carolina being the Palmetto state. You have Charleston Southern, you have College of Charleston, you have Davidson, which we already kind of spoke about. And then we have Furman, Presbyterian, Queens, which we already spoke about, South Carolina State, the Citadel, USC Upstate, Winthrop, and Wolford. Now, Davidson, Winthrop. That would be an excellent rivalry right there because you have Winthrop that's right on the border, and then you have Davidson on the other side of the border, state border. So it's like that would be a perfect rivalry right there. Same goes with Queens versus Winthrop. And then I would love to see the Battle of Charlotte in this conference, Davidson versus Queens. So and then you have the two Charleston schools that would be a perfect rivalry there too. I seen the College of Charleston basketball team play in the 2023 NCAA basketball tournament, and they were pretty good. I mean, you know, you have these schools and could be great rivalries against each other. Now we go to the Southern Conference. Alabama A&M, Alabama State, Bethune-Cookman, Florida Gulf Coast University, Florida A&M, Jacksonville, Mercer, North Alabama, North Florida, Samford, Stetson, and West Georgia. West Georgia is on its way of being um, converting from Division Two to Division One, and then they're going to be playing the FCS for football. So that's why they're in this conference, and it makes sense. These are mostly Florida and Alabama. There's only two FCS schools in the state of Georgia, Mercer and West Georgia. So figure why don't I put them here? Yeah, this would be a perfect conference. You would have a perfect rivalry with North Florida versus Jacksonville, and then you would have Bethune Cookman versus Stetson because they're near each other and all that. So, this would be a perfect setup here too. Now we go on to our next conference, and I call this the Delta because it's along the Mississippi River Delta. So I mean, what a perfect idea, and these schools are in Mississippi or Louisiana. We have Alcorn State, Grambling, Jackson State, McNeese State, Mississippi Valley State, New Orleans, Nichols State, Northwestern State, Southeastern Louisiana, and Southern. Now, having Mississippi and Louisiana in, in one conference would be a perfect ideal situation. And that's what I did here. And most of these schools are already in the same conference, but now we add some others and all that, and you have some potentially some great rivalries here too. And then we go to the R10 conference. Now, the reason why it's called the R10 because you have Arkansas and Tennessee. So that's why I came up with the name R10. Now, no other conference will have a number in them because I didn't want to do number in conferences. So and now we have the ARC 10, Arkansas, Tennessee, and the teams that are in it are from either Arkansas or Tennessee. We have Arkansas Little Rock, Arkansas Pine Bluffs, Austin Peay, Belmont, Central Arkansas, Chattanooga, East Tennessee, Lipscomb, Tennessee Martin, Tennessee State, and Tennessee Tech. Now, you know, 3 of the schools are in Arkansas and the rest are in Tennessee. You know, I mean, this would be some of these rivalries could be pretty cool to notice. Little Rock versus Pine Bluffs, and so on and so forth. Now we go on to our next one is the Ohio Valley. And you'll notice that these schools are in Kentucky, Ohio, and Michigan. We have Bellarmine, Bellarmine, don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. They're a newer school that transitioned into Division One. Then we have Cleveland State, Dayton, Detroit, Eastern Kentucky, Morehead State, Murray State, Northern Kentucky, Oakland, Wright State, Xavier, Youngstown State. Now we see a classic rivalry from the A10 coming back. Dayton versus Xavier. So that would be pretty cool to see that. And then some of the other ones, Cleveland State versus Youngstown State, Eastern Kentucky versus Northern Kentucky, Detroit versus Oakland, because they're both in the Detroit metro area. And then Morehead State versus Wright State, or Morehead State versus Murray State. And that's pretty cool too. So that's kind of why I kind of did that. The next conference we have is the Midland. We have Butler, Eastern Illinois, Evansville, Illinois State, Indiana State, IUPUI, Purdue Fort Wayne, Southeastern Missouri State, Southern Illinois, Edwardsville, Southern Indiana. Now, I put Southeastern Missouri State on here because of the rivalry with Southern Illinois and Southern Illinois Edwardsville. So that's why I did that. It'd be pretty cool to see some of these rivalries form, like Illinois State versus Southern Illinois, Indiana State versus Southern Indiana, you know. And I could have included other Illinois schools on here, but then we needed to balance out the conferences. So that's why we see what we see here. Now we go into our next conference. We have the Great Lakes. Now we have Bradley, Chicago State, DePaul, Drake, Illinois Chicago, Loyola Chicago, Marquette, Northern Iowa, St. Thomas, Valparaiso, Western Illinois, Wisconsin Green Bay, Wisconsin Milwaukee. Now in this one, I would love to see a Chicago rivalry here. Because you have Chicago State, DePaul, Illinois Chicago, Loyola Chicago, those 4 schools. And then you have Valparaiso, which is located in Gary, Indiana, which is in that area. And then you have Wisconsin Green Bay, Wisconsin Milwaukee. And then you also have Milwaukee and Marquette, because Marquette is in Milwaukee. So that'd be a cool rivalry right there. A Milwaukee rivalry, you know. And then we have a Iowa rivalry here with Northern Iowa and Drake. And then Bradley's in near Western Illinois as well. So, I mean, this is set up to be a great conference. Of course, you have DePaul and Marquette from the Big East, and you have Loyola Chicago from the A10. I mean, you know, it'd be great to see this wonderful conference have some great rivalries. We go from the Great Lakes to the Great American. Now, this was originally going to be called Central American, but I didn't want to confuse the Central American countries with this one. So that's why I called it the Great American instead. We have Creighton, Lindenwood, Missouri State, Nebraska Omaha, North Dakota State, Oral Roberts, South Dakota State, St. Louis, UMKC, and Wichita State. Now you see Creighton on here from the Big East. You have Wichita State from the American Athletic. Then you have St. Louis from the A10. So, I mean, some of these rivalries could be great to see. St. Louis versus UMKC, where you used to have the Rams versus the Chiefs rivalry in Missouri, the Missouri Cup, and then you have the Cardinals versus Royals rivalry there. So, I mean, why not continue it in college basketball and all the other college sports too? And then, of course, you have the South Dakota State rivalry, North Dakota State rivalry there too. And then you can see a Nebraska Omaha and Creighton rivalry because Creighton, Creighton and Omaha are in Omaha. So there you go. So I mean, very cool to see these rivalries that could be formed. And then you have Oral Roberts in Oklahoma. All right, our next conference is our second conference in the great state of Texas after the Lone Star Conference. So in this one, we have Abilene Christian, Houston Christian, Incarnate Word, Lamar, Prairie View A&M, Stephen F. Austin, Tarleton State, Texas A&M Commerce, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, Texas Arlington, Texas Southern, and UTRGV, which is Rio Grande Valley. Now, this one would be perfect because all the teams are located in Texas. So they wouldn't have to travel out of state for conference games. Which I would love to see that happen. And you also have some of the great rivalries here and new rivalries form and I mean, why not have the two Texas A&M teams play each other? You know, I mean, this is pretty interesting to see. Now we go into the Mountain Division, or Conference, excuse me, where we have Denver, Grand Canyon, Idaho, Idaho State, Montana State, Northern Arizona, Northern Colorado, Southern Utah, Utah Tech, Utah Valley, and Weber State. Now, here we have some pretty interesting schools. We have Denver and Northern Colorado. That could be a great rivalry there. Grand Canyon, Northern Arizona, another one. And then, of course, you have the Idaho State, Montana State. And then you can have the rivalries all within Utah with Southern Utah, Utah Tech, Utah Valley, and Weber State. So that would be cool to see too. I can see this. And these are all located in the mountain states, so there you go. I think I think we already had a mountain division, don't we? Well, one of them can be known as Mountain, and the other one can be known as Mountain West. So I think the other one I put as Mountain West. I don't remember. You can look back to what I did. And then now we have the SoCal Conference. Cal Baptist, Cal State Fullerton, Cal State Northridge, Long Beach State, Loyola Marymount, Pepperdine, San Diego, UC Bakersfield, UC Irvine, UC Riverside, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara. And these are going to be a great rivalry, and you don't have to leave Southern California for all these. So, it works out. You could have Fullerton versus Northridge as a great rivalry, and then you have all the UC teams as a great rivalry, and then you have UC San Diego versus San Diego. That'd be a cool rivalry because they're both in the same city. So there we go on that one. And then our final non-FBS primary conference we have is the Northwestern. I know some of these schools are located in California, but I consider naming it the Northwestern Conference because of the fact that it's the northwestern part of the United States. And I know California is not associated with the northwest part of the United States, but for this one, it is going to be so. We have Cal Poly, we have Eastern Washington, Gonzaga, Pacific, Portland, Portland State, Sacramento State, San Francisco, Santa Clara, Seattle, St. Mary's, and UC Davis. Now, we already have some great rivalries with this. Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They'll continue on with that. And of course, we can form new ones with Gonzaga, East Washington, Portland versus Portland State, and then we have Seattle versus Eastern Washington. And then we could have some other ones, San Francisco versus Sacramento State. So, these are perfect rivalries, and we could see more of them with this one. So now we go on to our last section here, which is the FCS conferences. Now, these are schools that have FCS teams. Note that there are some of the conferences from the primary conferences merged to create these FCS conferences. And like I've said before, there are no FBS schools and FCS schools sharing the same conference. So that's why we have it this way. And it'd be real cool to see the conferences form this way and the great new rivalries that they'll bring. Now, Ivy League, we already have talked about this, but here's the list once again for you to consider. Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Harvard, Pennsylvania, Princeton, and Yale. Now we go into the New England Conference, and this time, yes, we have the Connecticut schools on here. This time we include Connecticut because there are schools like Vermont, UMass Lowell, and Boston University that do not offer football. So essentially, these three Connecticut schools will take their place in that conference. So from the New England Conference, we have Bryant, Holy Cross, Maine, Merrimack, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Stonehill. Now from the Metro Conference, we have Central Connecticut State, Quinnipiac, and Sacred Heart. Now I put them on here because of the fact that now you have total New England on here, with the exception of Vermont, because Vermont does not have a FCS school. I mean, why not? Welcome Connecticut in. And there we go. So this would be excellent to see. Now, the next one is the Empire Conference. And this time, yep, The other metro schools that have FCS are in this division, or in this conference. So from the Empire Conference, we have Albany, Colgate, Marist, Stony Brook. And from the Metro, we have Fordham, Long Island, Monmouth, and Wagner. You see Monmouth on here, and they're New Jersey, but they're going to be placed in this conference for logistic reasons. And in the Atlantic Conference, we have Lafayette and Lehigh. And I decided to put them in here too because they are Eastern Pennsylvania. So it's like, they'd be perfect to play along with Monmouth, you know. So that's why I did that way. Now we go on next to the Mason-Dixon Conference. We have Bucknell, Duquesne, Mercyhurst, Morgan State, Robert Morris, St. Francis, and Townsend. Now, we also get to add a couple of schools from the Atlantic Conference on here. Delaware State and Villanova. It balances out. There you go. So this would be pretty cool to see. Would be pretty cool to see Duquesne, which is an A10 school, versus Villanova, which is a Big East school, taking on each other. Now, our next conference is the Capital. And in this one, we also partnered up with the Tar Heel Conference. So you'll see schools from North Carolina in addition to schools from DC and Virginia. And the schools from DC are Georgetown and Howard. And then the schools from Virginia, you have Hampton, Norfolk State, Richmond, VMI, and William and Mary. Actually, these would be two great divisions in the Capital Conference. And in the Tar Heel Conference, we have Campbell, Elon, Gardner Webb, High Point, North Carolina AT, North Carolina Central, and Western Carolina. So you see, one division of the conference could be all the teams in the Capital Conference, and the other are in the Tar Heel Conference. That would be pretty cool to see. Now, the next one, we have Southern. And now we formed a partnership here with the Palmetto Conference. Now, the Southern Conference, we excluded the Alabama schools, and I put them in the next one for logistic reasons. But here we go with this one. So in the Southern, from the Southern, we have Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M, Mercer, Stetson, and West Georgia. Now in the Palmetto, we have Charleston Southern, Davidson, Furman, Presbyterian, South Carolina State, the Citadel, and Wofford. So that is an interesting mix here. But I chose the Southern name because it would represent both South Carolina and Georgia and Florida. So, I know it might be a stretch to have teams from South Carolina play versus teams from Florida and Georgia and all that, but it's like, it was the best possible option we had here. Now we go from the Southern to the Delta. And you can see the other four schools from the Southern on here. Alabama A&M, Alabama State, North Alabama, and Samford. Joining the Deltas, Alcorn State, Jackson State, McNeese State, Mississippi Valley State, Nicholls State, Northwestern State, Southeastern Louisiana, and Southern. So there we go. So majority of the schools are in the Delta, and then you have the 4 Alabama schools from the Southern that would be in this conference, football FCS conference. So that'd be pretty cool to see. Now we go into the ARC-10 conference, and pretty much it's every team from, or, you have all the ARC-10 schools that have football, and then we added Grambling from Delta just to even it out, you know. So it'd be pretty cool to see how this would work out. Then we go on to the Midland, which is a combination of Midland and Ohio Valley. Now in the Midland, you have Butler, Eastern Illinois, Illinois State, Indiana State, Southeastern Missouri State, Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana. And they are joined by the Ohio Valley, which is Dayton, Eastern Kentucky, Morehead State, Murray State, and Youngstown State. Now notice there are no Michigan schools on here because Michigan does not have FCS. And then there are some of the schools in Ohio Valley that don't have FCS either. So that'd be pretty cool to see how this would work out. And we kept the Midland name because of the Midland Conference. Now we go on to our next conference, and we keep the Great American name with this one. Now, with this one, we have the Great American, we have the Great Lakes, and we also have one from the mountain. And I'll explain to you about that after. But for right now, let's talk about the Great American schools from the Great American Conference. Lindenwood, Missouri State, North Dakota State, South Dakota, and South Dakota State. Now they are joined by the Great Lakes Conference, Drake, Northern Iowa, St. Thomas, Valparaiso, and Western Illinois. And they are also joined by the mountain, Northern Colorado from the mountain. Now I put them on here for logistics because of the fact that you're going to see later on it'd be too many teams in the other conference where I was going to put them. So, all right, we go to the Texas conference now, and you notice that a couple of the schools are not on here, but they are. But the rest of the schools that were from the Texas conference are in this Texas conference. So you have those ones. But just to recap, we have Abilene Christian, Houston Christian, Incarnate Word, Lamar, Prairie View A&M, Stephen F. Austin, Carlston State, Texas A&M Commerce, Texas Southern, and UTRGV. Now you do not have Texas A&M Corpus Christi or Texas Arlington. Those are the two that are missing from this list. But the rest of the Texas Conference is here. And we talk about our final FCS conference, the Big West. Now, I came up with the Big West because you have all these teams from the West. And surprisingly enough, there are more schools in the Mountain Conference than there are in the Northwest Conference and SoCal Conference for FCS. So let's start out with the Mountain. And we combine the three conferences and come up with the Big West because of the space of the Big West. So we have Idaho, Idaho State, Montana, Montana State, Northern Arizona, Southern Utah, Utah Tech, and Weber State. They are joined by San Diego from the SoCal Conference, and they are also joined by Cal Poly, Eastern Washington, Portland State, Sacramento State, and UC Davis from the Northwest Conference. So you see, I know it's three conferences in one, but they can make a great conference and call themselves the Big West. And that'd be really cool to see that. So I do hope that you guys enjoyed this. I know it's not going to happen for real, but I know that it'd be pretty cool if someday we can get the conferences back to where they were before and even form these new conferences where it's based on geography and not based on money and all that. And it gives the schools a better chance to compete, and don't have to have mid majors versus major and all that. And, you know what I mean? Give everyone a fair shot. And that's why I kind of created this. So I would like to thank you for listening to my podcast and thank you for watching this video. And I thank you so much. And let's hope that someday, like I've said, these will happen for real, but I know they will not. Thank you so much.